The archivist had always been a shadow in the grand halls of the library. While scholars and visiting professors filled the marble corridors with their debates and boastful theories, he kept to the dust, working silently, forgotten among the shelves. His name was Elias Marquez, though few ever remembered it. He was simply the quiet archivist, a man who mended bindings, catalogued forgotten collections, and stacked the manuscripts no one cared to read. But on that storm-drenched evening, when lightning rattled the glass dome above, Elias opened a drawer in the farthest wing of the library and pulled out something that would alter the course of history. It was a bundle of parchment, brittle as autumn leaves, wrapped in faded linen. The fabric was marked with unfamiliar symbols, sharp lines that seemed to stare back at him. He brushed the dust from the cover and saw what looked like Mayan glyphs, rare, intricate, and utterly out of place in a European library that had long dismissed indigenous records as footnotes in the saga of history. Elias's heart raced. His hands, usually steady, trembled as he unwrapped the linen and revealed the manuscript inside. The opening page was a storm of glyphs, swirling across the parchment like constellations of an ancient sky. Most would have seen nothing but meaningless drawings, but Elias had spent his years in silence, reading fragments of every script he could find. Hebrew, Aramaic, Akkadian, Sanskrit languages, forgotten by empires, absorbed into the background of his lonely nights. And years ago, when another manuscript crossed his desk with Mayan symbols, he had secretly begun learning them, line by line, refusing to let them slip into oblivion. Now, those hidden hours came flooding back like a tide, and he felt a strange certainty that this manuscript had been waiting for him. Still, fear gnawed at him. If this is what I think it is, no one will believe me. He pressed his palm against the page, feeling the texture of ink that had survived centuries. His lips moved in silence, translating fragments. Star, descent, time of shadow, awakening. The words made his chest tighten. They hinted at a prophecy, a voice of warning from a civilization that had seen far beyond its age. He closed his eyes. For years he had been dismissed by the very scholars he served. They mocked his quietness, his lack of titles, his refusal to publish grand theories. He was invisible until this moment. Yet with discovery came the risk of ridicule. If he shared what he found, they would laugh again, harder than ever. Or worse, they might try to bury it all, like they buried every inconvenient truth that didn't fit their prideful narratives. Lightning cracked outside, the sound echoing like a drumbeat of destiny. Elias whispered to himself, "No one must know. Not yet." He folded the manuscript carefully, tucking it beneath his coat, and locked the drawer as if to erase any trace of its presence. As he walked through the echoing halls, the faces of statues lining the corridor seemed to watch him, stern and knowing. His heart pounded with the knowledge that he was carrying a voice from the past, one that had survived centuries of conquest and silence, a voice that might change everything. And yet, Elias also carried a secret of his own. Years earlier, when he was just a boy in Yucatan, his grandmother had whispered forbidden tales of the ancients, stories the priests had forbidden, stories of gods who would return, of cycles that ended in fire and rebirth. He had buried those memories when he fled to Europe, pretending to be only a humble caretaker of books. But tonight, those whispers rose again, twining with the manuscript in his hands. Perhaps fate had chosen him not by accident, but by blood. He paused at the threshold of the library's great hall, the manuscript pressing against his chest like a heartbeat. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of Professor Armand's life. The storm raged on, shaking the windows as Elias stepped into the night, manuscript clutched tight. He did not yet know that his discovery would soon draw the attention of arrogant men who would mock him, dismiss him, and then, too late, realize the truth of the prophecy. that now pulsed through his trembling hands. The archivist's silent discovery was only the beginning. Rain hammered the cobblestones outside as Elias sat alone in his narrow room above the library, a single oil lamp flickering against the walls, lined with forgotten books. The manuscript lay open on his desk, its glyphs illuminated in amber light, like spirits rising from the parchment. He leaned forward, his lips tracing the patterns, whispering syllables in a tongue that most had forgotten. At first, the glyphs seemed to recount a ritual, a sequence of offerings to gods Elias knew well from his grandmother's tales. But as he read deeper, a strange rhythm emerged, a repetition of dates, celestial markers, and warnings. The words clung together like shadows: the descent of the dark star, the turning of the age, the silence before the fire. Elias's skin prickled. He recognized what scholars had dismissed as mere myth. The Mayans had recorded cycles of the world, predicting catastrophes and rebirths. This manuscript was not a myth, it was a prophecy. He ran his fingers through his dark hair, sweat beading along his temples. "Am I chasing phantoms?" Doubt whispered like a serpent. For years, he had lived under the weight of invisibility, careful never to overstep, never to claim too much. The professors called him meticulous, but insignificant. A pair of hands, nothing more. They once sneered when he lingered too long over a manuscript. What right did he have to believe that he alone could see what others had missed? But the words burned against him with undeniable clarity. His grandmother's voice came back to him, soft yet unshakable. "Elias, the ancients wrote so the world would not forget. One day, someone will hear them again." That memory steadied him. Perhaps this was why fate had led him here. He bent closer, sketching the glyphs onto scrap parchment. Each translation sent shivers through him: the shadow that consumes rulers, rivers that turn to dust, the fire from the sky that silences empires. His throat tightened. This was no local omen, it spoke of forces that transcended time and borders. And yet, amid the warnings, there was hope. In the time of silence, a scribe will open the path. Elias froze. A scribe? An archivist? Himself? His heart pounded. He stared into the flickering lamp flame, as if it too whispered of destiny. But just as conviction settled, the sound of voices drifted up from the street, scholars laughing as they left the library's evening gathering. Their words floated up like knives. "That archivist thinks he can read glyphs. Ridiculous. He should stick to dusting shelves." Elias clenched his fists until his nails cut into his palm. Even without knowing of his discovery, they mocked him, their arrogance a wall he had never been able to breach. The rain beat harder, masking the trembling in his chest. He turned back to the manuscript, determination flooding him. If the prophecy was true, it must be known, but not yet. Not while the scholars laughed. He would work alone, in silence, and prove them wrong with evidence they could not ignore. Hours passed. The lamp burned low, and shadows grew long across his desk. He traced one final line, whispering the translation: "The prophecy will return when the stars align, and those who mock shall tremble." Elias's breath caught. A cold certainty filled him. This was not just myth, nor mere story. It was a voice from the Mayan past, reaching across centuries, waiting for him to listen. He closed the manuscript gently, as though afraid it might vanish. His mind reeled with fear, wonder, and an unshakable sense of calling. For the first time, Elias understood. The whispers of the Mayan past were not gone. They were alive, etched into parchment, waiting for him to bring them into the light. And with every heartbeat, he knew the day would come when silence would no longer protect him. The next morning, Elias carried the manuscript wrapped tightly beneath his arm, its weight heavier than any book he had ever held. He had decided against his instincts to share fragments with the library's senior scholars. Perhaps, he reasoned, if he presented the glyphs carefully, without claiming too much, they might listen. At the very least, they would no longer look at him as a shadow, but as a man who had glimpsed something extraordinary. The council chamber smelled of ink and dust. Long tables littered with quills, candles, and half-read volumes. 6 professors sat at the center, men who wore their pride like armor. At the head of the table sat Professor Armand, the most celebrated Mayanist in Europe. His voice could silence rooms, his articles commanded headlines, and his contempt for those beneath him was legend. Elias's chest tightened as he laid the manuscript on the oak table. Armand raised one eyebrow. "What is this, Marquez? Another forgotten church ledger?" His tone dripped with disdain. Elias kept his voice steady. "It is a Mayan manuscript, sir, uncatalogued, buried in the archives." He carefully opened the linen wrap, revealing the glyphs shimmering in the candlelight. For a moment, the professors leaned forward, curiosity glinting in their eyes. Elias's pulse quickened. Perhaps they would see. Perhaps they would understand. "I have translated part of it," Elias continued, his voice trembling despite his resolve. "It speaks of cycles, of celestial events, and a prophecy." He swallowed hard, his eyes flicking to Armand. Warnings of a coming shadow. Silence. Then came the laughter. One professor slapped the table, wheezing. Another leaned back in his chair, smirking. "A prophecy? From him?" Armand's smile was colder than the stone busts that lined the chamber. "You misunderstand your role, Marquez. You are not a scholar. You are a caretaker of books. The Mayan glyphs are complex, far beyond your grasp." Elias felt heat rising in his face, but he forced himself to stand tall. "I've studied them for years, quietly, alone. I can show you these lines here." He pointed to the manuscript, his finger tracing the symbols. "They repeat. It is no accident. They speak of descent, of upheaval." "Of nothing," Armand interrupted, his voice sharp as a blade. "You see patterns because you long for significance. But significance belongs to those who earn it, not to servants who polish shelves." The laughter swelled again, echoing against the chamber walls. Elias's throat burned. Inside, his thoughts screamed. Why do they mock what they do not even read? Why do they crush truth beneath arrogance? But outwardly, he only lowered his hand, retreating into the shadow of his own silence. Still, the manuscript gleamed on the table, alive with meaning they refused to see. For a moment, Elias imagined the glyphs themselves mocking the scholars, knowing that their secrets could not be silenced forever. Professor Armand tapped the parchment with one long finger, his voice low and dismissive. "You will return this to its drawer, Marquez, and you will never again waste our time with your fantasies." Elias gathered the manuscript slowly, hands steady though his heart thundered. He nodded, saying nothing. But as he turned away, the fury inside him hardened into something new, not despair, but resolve. If they would not listen, he would prove them wrong. The prophecy would not stay hidden, and when it came to light, the world would remember who first brought it from the shadows. Outside, in the echoing corridor, Elias pressed the manuscript to his chest. For the first time, he did not feel like a servant. He felt like a guardian of truth, standing alone against the laughter of men who could not see beyond their pride. And deep down, a voice whispered, "Their laughter is only the beginning. When the prophecy speaks, they will tremble." Night fell heavy over the city, and the library's great dome glittered faintly under the stormlight. Elias returned to his narrow room, locking the door behind him with trembling fingers. On his desk lay the manuscript, its glyphs glowing faintly in the lamp's flame, as if the ink itself carried fire. The laughter of the professors still rang in his ears, cutting like glass. But Elias pressed his palms against the table and whispered, "I will prove them wrong." He spread his notes across the desk, lines upon lines of translations. His handwriting sprawled in uneven ink, frantic, yet determined. Each glyph he deciphered revealed more of the hidden prophecy. The dark star descends, the rulers fall in silence, the rivers turn to dust, the fire awakens the sky. His breath caught as the phrases formed a rhythm, not mere story but warning. Alive with urgency, he shut his eyes, and the memory of his grandmother rose again, the old woman, with weathered hands, whispering by firelight in Yucatan. The Mayan scribes wrote in cycles, Elias, every end is also a beginning. They knew, even when the conquerors mocked them. He had been a boy then, listening with wide eyes as thunder rolled outside their small hut. Those stories had stayed in him, buried beneath the silence he had worn all his life. But now, the manuscript breathed them back into fire. His hand trembled as he copied one final passage, and when the age of arrogance blinds the wise, the scribe of shadows will unlock the path. Elias froze. The words stabbed into him with startling clarity. A scribe, a keeper of manuscripts. Could it be coincidence? Or had the prophecy waited centuries for him, the forgotten archivist mocked by men too proud to read? His heart thundered, but doubt struck swiftly. What if I am wrong? What if I am seeing myself in what is not there? He leaned back in his chair, staring at the rain streaking the window. The echo of the professor's laughter returned, louder now. Caretaker of books, Armand had sneered. What if he's right? What if I am nothing more than that? No, Elias whispered aloud, his voice shaking but firm. He leaned over the manuscript again. The glyphs seemed to pulse with life, daring him to continue. Hours passed. The lamp's flames sank lower, shadows stretching like claws across the walls. Then, suddenly, a revelation. The prophecy was not only about destruction, it marked a place. Hidden between the glyphs of fire and silence, Elias uncovered repeated symbols of mountains, rivers, and a temple concealed beneath stone. His eyes widened. This was no abstract warning. It was a map. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping the wooden floor. A temple, he breathed, his voice raw with awe. They left the prophecy in stone. His hands shook as he traced the symbols. Somewhere, deep in the jungles of Central America, lay a temple no scholar had ever spoken of, erased from their grand histories. And within it, perhaps, the full truth of the prophecy awaited. At that moment, the silence of his room seemed to crack. He heard his own voice in his head, steady and defiant. They can laugh, they can mock. But when I find the temple, when I bring them proof carved in stone, they will kneel before truth itself. He gathered the manuscript to his chest, heart racing. The deciphering revelation was complete. He had uncovered not only the prophecy, but its destination. The laughter of the professors no longer cut him, it fueled him. For in the solitude of his chamber, Elias Marquez, the quiet archivist, had unlocked the beginning of something far greater than himself. Days blurred into nights as Elias pored over the manuscript, his mind consumed by the coordinates hidden within the glyphs. The symbols described a temple lost beneath jungle and stone, a place stricken from official memory by both time and conquest. Elias traced the sketches with a trembling finger, his breath uneven. They tried to erase it, but it survived. It waited. His narrow chamber no longer felt like a prison but like a command post. Maps of Central America covered the walls, his own notes layered over the contours of rivers and ridges. The manuscript spoke of a temple where silence reigns, guarded by shadows, where prophecy is carved in stone. Elias's pulse quickened each time he whispered those words. He knew the professors would never follow him, never risk their reputation on what they mocked as myth. That truth cut him, but it also freed him. This path belonged to him alone. Yet whispers of danger shadowed his thoughts. The library was not as silent as it seemed. One night, as Elias gathered his papers, he caught sight of movement in the reflection of his window, a figure slipping down the corridor outside his room. He froze. The manuscript clutched against his chest. They know. Someone suspects. He extinguished the lamp, letting darkness shield him, heart pounding in the silence. For hours he sat awake, ears straining at every creak of the building, until the dawn light finally washed over his desk. Fatigue pulled at him, but determination burned brighter. If they come for it, he whispered, they will not take it. Not before I reach the temple. His mind wandered to his past again, to a memory buried deep. As a child, he once followed his grandmother into the jungle, where ruins rose like broken teeth from the earth. She had pressed his hand against the stone carvings and whispered, "These walls remember, even when men forget." He had not understood then, but now the memory struck him with the force of revelation. The manuscript was not just words. It was a key. The temple was real. Still, fear clung to him. How would he reach it? He had no wealth, no expedition team, no scholarly credentials to secure funding. He was a lone archivist, with only his conviction and his silence. But in the solitude of his chamber, resolve hardened. He would find a way, whether through stolen hours, hidden passages in the records, or sheer endurance. Outside, rain lashed the city again, thunder rolling over the rooftops. Elias closed his eyes and pictured the jungle heat, the cries of unseen birds, the scent of earth heavy with age. He saw himself standing before the temple doors, their carvings glimmering with prophecy no scholar could deny. And for the first time, he smiled. Let them laugh, let them mock. His silence had always been his armor. Now, it would be his weapon. While the scholars feasted on their pride, Elias would follow the whispers of the manuscript into the heart of the earth. The secrets buried in stone were waiting, and soon he would stand where no professor dared to tread, the prophecy alive around him, daring the arrogant to ignore its voice. The whisper of secrets could never stay buried for long. Word of Elias's obsession began to leak from the library walls. The janitor, who once caught sight of the strange parchment, the clerk who noticed maps scattered across his chamber, and one evening, when Elias left the manuscript unattended for a moment, a passing assistant caught a glimpse of the glyphs and ran to tell Professor Armand. By the next day, murmurs had spread. The archivist was chasing phantoms, they said. He thought he had found some lost temple. Armand's booming laugh echoed down the marble corridors. Marquez believes he will rewrite history. Let him chase his myths in the mud. The scholars roared in amusement. But behind their ridicule lay something else. Curiosity, and fear that perhaps the quiet man had truly stumbled onto something they had overlooked. Elias felt it, the air had changed. When he walked past groups of students, their voices lowered. When he carried books through the halls, he saw eyes linger too long. He clutched the manuscript tighter against his chest, his every step measured. They know now, they will try to take it. That night, he sat in his chamber, mind racing. He had to leave. The manuscript's map pointed clearly now to a region deep in the jungles of Guatemala, a stretch where ruins slumbered beneath vines. He could no longer study in silence. The prophecy demanded more than translation, it demanded action. But how could he travel alone, without resources, while eyes watched his every move? As he weighed his options, footsteps echoed outside his door. Slow, deliberate. Elias extinguished his lamp instantly, his room drowning in darkness. He sat frozen, breath shallow, as the footsteps halted at his threshold. A hand pressed against the wood, lingering. Then, silence. Minutes crawled by before the steps retreated. Elias exhaled, heart hammering. They were circling closer. The next morning, as he passed through the reading hall, Armand confronted him, his voice sharp and mocking. "Still chasing shadows, Marquez? Be careful. Men who chase phantoms often disappear into them." The warning was disguised as ridicule, but Elias heard the threat beneath. He said nothing, but inside, fury burned. "They mock me, yet they fear me. Why else would they watch me so closely?" That night, Elias packed his few possessions: a leather satchel, scraps of translation, and the manuscript wrapped in linen. He stared out the window at the rain-slicked city and whispered, "The prophecy is not theirs, it is mine to guard." Yet he knew he was not the only one preparing. Armand's pride would not allow him to be eclipsed by a silent archivist. Others, two ambitious rivals, greedy collectors, would smell opportunity. The discovery was no longer Elias's alone. It was a race. And races had consequences. In his mind, Elias saw the jungle path already. torches flickering in the damp night, eyes of strangers hungry for gold rather than truth, footsteps pressing into the soil of a temple that had waited centuries. He felt the danger coil around him, but instead of fear, he felt resolve. Let them come, he thought. They will chase treasure. I will chase truth. And truth always outlasts pride. The prophecy had awakened not only him, but a storm of rivals. And in that storm, Elias would have to fight not with weapons, but with silence, conviction, and the fire of the ancients guiding his every step. The jungle loomed before him like a living wall, dense and unyielding. Days of travel had carried Elias far from the marble corridors of the library, into a world where the air was thick with heat and the cries of unseen birds echoed like ancient warnings. His boots sank into damp earth, and every vine seemed to clutch at his arms as though testing his resolve. But his eyes burned with determination. The manuscript had guided him here, and each step carried him closer to the truth buried in stone. He was not alone. He had seen them days earlier, shadows slipping through the trees, voices at night carried by the wind. Rivals had followed, men who sought glory or wealth, perhaps even Armand's emissaries, determined to steal what they had mocked. Elias knew the race had already begun. Yet he pressed forward, clutching the manuscript beneath his shirt, whispering the glyphs like prayers. The scribe of shadows will open the path. After endless hours of hacking through undergrowth, he stumbled into a clearing. His breath caught. Before him rose a wall of stone, smothered by roots and moss. But unmistakable, a temple, its carved steps ascending into shadow. The glyphs along its surface matched the manuscript perfectly. Elias fell to his knees, overwhelmed by awe. It exists. It truly exists. But awe gave way to urgency. Torches flickered in the distance, others were coming. He rushed to the base of the temple, running his fingers over the carvings. They told the same prophecy he had translated: the descent of the dark star, the silence of empires, the rebirth of the age. His pulse raced as he uncovered glyphs unseen by modern eyes, their message sharper, louder. When arrogance deafens the wise, stone itself shall speak. Suddenly, a voice rang out behind him. Step away from the wall, Marquez. Elias froze. Professor Armand emerged from the tree line, flanked by two men carrying rifles. His face glistened with sweat, but his eyes gleamed with triumph. You were useful after all, Armand sneered. Your obsession led us here, but now history will remember me. Elias's chest tightened, fury and fear clashing within him. He pressed a hand against the carvings, feeling their grooves as if drawing strength from them. You mocked what you never read, he said softly, his voice trembling yet firm. You silenced what you feared, but the stone does not lie. Armand's laugh echoed across the clearing. Stone can be broken, manuscripts can be burned. Only power decides truth. He stepped closer, torchlight casting monstrous shadows across his face. Hand it over. Elias met his gaze. For years he had been silent, swallowing the cruelty of men like Armand. But now, the prophecy's words pulsed in his veins. The scribe of shadows will unlock the path. He pulled the manuscript from beneath his shirt and held it high. This is not yours to claim, it never was. The rifles shifted, aiming at his chest. Yet before Armand could give the order, the ground trembled. A deep rumble rose from the earth, as though the temple itself had awakened at Elias's words. Dust cascaded from the stone walls, and a hidden panel cracked open, revealing a chamber within, lit by a shaft of golden light. Gasps filled the clearing. Even Armand's eyes widened, his arrogance faltering for the first time. Elias stepped forward, heart pounding. Inside the chamber, carvings glittered with prophecy far older than any manuscript. The temple itself bore witness, etched in stone for eternity. The archivist turned back once, meeting Armand's stunned gaze. You laughed at prophecy. Now hear it. His voice rang steady, carrying the weight of centuries. For the first time, silence fell over the arrogant professor. And in that silence, Elias entered the temple, the hidden truth of the prophecy burning brighter than any torch, awaiting the one man humble enough to listen. Weeks passed, and the world shifted. Newspapers blazed with headlines of a discovery in the Guatemalan jungle, a Mayan temple, untouched for centuries, its walls engraved with prophecies scholars had once dismissed as myth. For the first time in his life, Elias Marquez's name appeared in print, no longer as a shadow in the margins of academia, but as the archivist who had unearthed a revelation. Photographs of the carvings circulated across Europe, stone etchings that mirrored his translations, warnings of celestial cycles, collapse, and rebirth. No longer whispers on brittle parchment, they were carved in immovable stone. The professors who had laughed found themselves silent, their pride cracked beneath the weight of undeniable truth. Professor Armand, once untouchable, avoided the public eye. Some whispered that he had fled the jungle in terror when the chamber opened, others that he had fallen ill upon his return. Whatever the truth, his voice no longer commanded halls. His name was now tied not to triumph, but to arrogance exposed. Elias, meanwhile, returned to the library, not to the shadows, but to an office newly prepared for him. Yet he did not walk the marble halls with arrogance. He moved quietly, as he always had, though now silence was no longer mistaken for insignificance. Students approached him with questions, eyes wide with respect. Even the professors bowed their heads when he passed, though none dared speak of the ridicule they had once hurled at him. In the solitude of his new chamber, Elias often unwrapped the manuscript, its glyphs familiar as the lines of his own hands. He would read them softly, not for acclaim or recognition, but because the voice of the ancients still stirred him. He knew the prophecy was not finished, that its warnings reached beyond academic triumph, but he also knew it had fulfilled its first promise. The arrogant had been silenced, and the forgotten had been heard. One evening, as the sun bled through stained glass windows, Elias closed the manuscript and let his hand rest gently upon it. He thought of his grandmother, her stories whispered by firelight, stories mocked by priests and dismissed as superstition. How proud she would have been to see that the voices of her ancestors had endured, that truth could not be erased by laughter or pride. He rose, walking the length of the library's great hall, the silence around him deeper than it had ever been. But it was no longer the silence of dismissal. It was reverence, the stillness that follows revelation, when arrogance bows before truth. At the doors, he paused and looked back once more at the towering shelves, the dust, the books that had been his only companions. His lips curved into the faintest of smiles. He had never needed fame or power. He had needed only to listen. And that was the lesson the world now saw. That strength is not always loud, that wisdom is not always clad in titles, and that humility can unlock truths pride will never touch. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph.